Hello! So today we're going to talk about growling. I had a couple of questions in about why does your dog growl when you touch them? And I just wanted to talk about, first of all, what is the function of growling? And much like the function of barking, it is a form of communication, as we know. I think where the confusion lies is what is that communication actually saying to us, and so let's talk about a little bit about why the dog might be growling, what the growl means, and what we should do about it. So your dog certainly is, if he's growling at you when you touch them, for example, or if you go near him when he's eating, or there could be a huge amount of different reasons why the dog is growling, but it is certainly a communication of warning. So it's a warning signal, and it's a very, very important form of communication. I think it's one of the most important forms of communication, and sadly it's one of the most punished communications that we see in day-to-day life with dogs. So the reason I guess humans punish growling is because it elicits in us, the dog guardian, a response of fear. If your dog growls at you, it's a warning signal and it's back off. And it certainly, in the past, for me, when my own dog would have growled at me, and he's got a lot of pain issues, and so it took a long time to kind of understand why, what was okay and what was not okay with my dog. And so when he growled at me, and I mean, it still happens, my tummy flips. I still go, oh God, if he growls at me and I've touched him in a sore place, I have a fear response, and it creates butterflies in my tummy. Quite often, a fear response in both dogs and humans ends up in aggressive behavior, because we don't know what to do with that fear. And so what ends up happening is the dog ends up getting punished. So the dog ends up being dragged outside, or put into a crate, or smacked, or being told off, or being isolated. And all of these punishments that humans do on a daily basis to their dogs, sadly, is designed, I guess, to suppress that behavior. Now, unfortunately, what we don't see is that no matter how much we suppress a communication, it's not going to suppress the way the dog feels about the circumstance in which they were in that made them growl in the first place. So we can suppress their communication, but we do not suppress the way they feel. They still feel worried or upset or nervous about something. They just don't communicate that. Now, the problem there is we end up having a dog that stops communicating a certain behavior that is a really important behavior, that is a pre-bite behavior. So the growl is kind of like third from the top. We have growling, then we have air snapping, and then we have biting. In and around that order. There's a few other things that come in and out, but it's right up there at the top. So if your dog is growling at you, the first, most important, safest thing to do is to step back from your dog, stop doing whatever it was that you were doing that has made your dog growl, and start to ask more questions. The more questions is the most important thing. I think as well, it's really important to understand that your dog is not disrespecting you. Your dog is asking for space, and they're asking for you to stop doing whatever you're doing. Or even, it might even be that you're not touching the dog, that it is the presence of a person that makes the dog growl. And for them, whatever it is around the circumstance of that person, they mightn't feel safe, and that's why they're growling. So a dog's growl is a response to the nervous system, and a response to whatever is going on inside the dog's body, to the stimulus outside of the dog. So the most important thing to do is to just stop and listen. Now, the other thing that we can do is to start understanding ourselves and our own behavior and our own responses to the dog's growl. If we can step back and look at that as a massive gift, we can start to see the perspective in a whole new light. So my dog has, as I've mentioned, has a lot of pain issues, and it's a little bit like detective work, working out where it is in his body that is painful, where it's okay to touch and where it's not okay to touch. That can vary from day to day. It can also vary from circumstance to circumstance. So, I might go to touch his back or his neck when he's downstairs in the kitchen, and it was an unsolicited pet. He might well go for me, or he might well growl at me. Whereas in the morning time, when he comes up and he has a cuddle on the bed, he's okay with that. So it's really tricky sometimes. Each dog is different and each set of circumstances are different. And if we can not take it personally, but take it as a gift, to start an invitation to ask more questions and to start to learn how the dog is feeling, empathize with the way the dog is feeling, because that poor dog, if he's growling, something's not right. So we can look at the circumstances surrounding that growl and start to put together that little jigsaw puzzle. It might be that their ears go back when you touch them in a certain place on their body, or they might give you whale eye, where you can just see the whites of their eyes. They might be holding tension in their mouth. Their breath is so important. So really tuning into your dog and tuning into the way they're breathing slows things down for both you and the dog. And you start to learn, okay, maybe it's in the breath. Often before a bite, we see the dog hold their breath. Or if we're touching too vigorously, maybe the dog is getting too wound up inside and their breath starts to exasperate. Or, if your dog is relaxed, sometimes the breath just goes and they have this beautiful let go. So start tuning into the fine stuff, the micro expressions, those tiny details. Instead of looking at the bigger picture, we need to be looking at all the tiny details surrounding the bigger picture. The bigger picture being the bite or the growl or the big behavior. That's not the problem. It's all the other tiny little things that are surrounding that big picture that we need to start looking at, because the clues and the answers lie in those things, not the growl itself. If we're looking at the growl itself, we're going to miss why the dog is growling. We're going to miss what the dog is feeling. So strip it back. I would definitely suggest around touch. If it's a touch issue, there could be pain. So I would definitely suggest hooking onto the ACE Connections page, Sarah Fisher's ACE Connections page, and looking at some free work. And the foundation of free work, when you move through free work, you then start to introduce touch in a connective way and in a mindful way where you and the dog are tuning into that. And then there's consent too. So the dog doesn't succumb to touch under social pressure, but comes to touch because they want to be touched rather than what we want from the dog. So that's a really good way of kind of introducing touch to your dog and introducing that kind of safe boundary where your dog's not growling, through the ACE connection stuff and the free work stuff. You can also do another thing that we call the consent test. And the consent test is you take your hands off your dog for a week. I always suggest a week of no touch at all. It's really hard, but it's fascinating because you start to learn way more about your dog when you look at your dog rather than looking at what you're doing to your dog. So you take your hands off the dog. After a week, you start to introduce touch on a really slow, calm way. 3 seconds. So 3, 2, 1, take your hands off. And then you start to see, does the dog come back or does the dog walk away? That'll tell us something, surely. Now, is it just where you touch them? Is it okay here, but it's not okay here? That's something to take into consideration. Is it down their back? Are there coat pattern changes? Is there hair changes? Are there, is there posture changes? Is there tension? And often we see it in and around sort of age 7 or age 8. We start to see behavioral changes, and it's usually quite often associated with pain. So, why does my dog growl when I touch him? It's a fantastic question. And so many of you asked. I think you need to ask more questions. You need to take the focus off the touch and start to look at the micro message that your dog is giving you. And if we can take our own personal hurt away when our dog growls at us and look at it as a gift and say thank you, we'll be able to see past our own worry about how the dog is, about how we felt about the dog communicating through growling. And to remember that it's so important not to punish out the growl. If we punish the growl, we stop the communication, but we don't stop the reason for the communication. So it will take another form. That communication will escalate because they've been punished for growling, so they'll do something else to communicate that they're feeling uneasy with being touched or whatever the reason is that they're growling. So don't punish the growl. It's so, so important. Stand back and manage that situation and that circumstance so that you can see why the dog is growling. And certainly, if you find that your dog is growling consistently in the same situation, then please don't put your dog in that situation. Step back and start to work out that little jigsaw puzzle and see the reasons why your dog is growling. I hope that's answered some of your questions. I'm sure we could talk about this all day. It's a fantastic question. And each dog is different and each circumstance is different. So there's never one simple answer, but I think the answer is to ask more questions. That is the big answer. And to start to look inward, start to understand our own feelings around how we react to our dog when they growl, and to not to take it personally, but to just ask more questions. Okay, hope that is helpful. And if you have any more questions, just send them on through. I'm loving it. All right, take care. Bye.